I never imagined that at 68 years old, I would still be walking into the office every morning with my head held high, greeted by the sight of the glass doors gleaming under the lobby lights and the smell of freshly brewed coffee wafting from the reception desk. People always assumed that when my husband Armand passed away 10 years ago, I would quietly retreat from the world and live out my days with photo albums and knitting needles. But that was never the kind of woman I was. Armin and I had built our business from nothing when we were both young and reckless enough to believe in impossible dreams. Back then, we had no capital, only determination. We worked out of a garage that smelled of oil and paint thinner, taking orders we could barely fulfill, and yet somehow we survived. Later, we thrived. When Armin died, everyone expected me to sell my shares, step aside, and let the younger generation take over. They didn't know that Armin had entrusted the company entirely to me before his final breath. He had whispered, "Romina, you will know what to do." And I had promised him that I would never let what we created fall into the wrong hands. The only person who never knew the full truth was my son, Daniel. I told myself that I was protecting him by not disclosing that I had become the sole owner of the company after Armin's passing. He believed I simply continued in my role as senior director, a prestigious position I had held for years. He thought the real power still sat with the board of directors, and I never corrected him. I wanted him to live free of manipulation, free of the vultures who would circle him the moment they knew he had influence. Daniel and I had always had a decent relationship. He wasn't the most affectionate son, but he had never disrespected me either. We spoke every weekend, and I could still hear the boy in him when he called to ask about my health, or whether I needed help around the house. Yet things began to change when he married Clara. I never said much about her at first. She was beautiful, with long, dark hair and a smile that could win over any stranger. But there was something behind her politeness that unsettled me. She carried herself as if she were always calculating, always deciding what part of herself to show and what part to conceal. From the beginning, our conversations were strained. She would compliment my cooking while pushing the food around her plate. She would smile at me while her eyes flicked toward Daniel to make sure he was watching. And she would thank me for gifts, only to suggest later that perhaps I didn't quite understand what she really liked. I told myself it was simply a matter of adjustment. Many mothers and daughters-in-law never grow close, and perhaps we simply needed time. I never fought with her openly, but our exchanges were cold, polite, and empty. What Daniel saw as normal family life felt to me like a series of negotiations in which I was always the one conceding. It was one Sunday evening when Daniel called me with that hesitant tone in his voice that I had come to recognize. "Mom," he said, "Clara's been looking for a job for months now. You know how the market is, and she's been having a really hard time. I was wondering if maybe you could help her out?" I hesitated, staring at the photographs of Armin on my living room wall. I remembered how often he had warned me about mixing family with business, but I also remembered how Daniel had helped me in the years after his father's death, showing up at my house when I least expected it, fixing the leaking faucet or replacing the broken garden light. He had tried in his own way to be a good son, and so I told him, "Of course, I will see what I can do." The following Monday, I asked my assistant, Layla, to arrange an interview for Clara in one of the departments where we were short-staffed. Layla had been with me for over 15 years. She was in her 50s, dependable, discreet, and one of the few people who knew the truth about my ownership of the company. "Are you sure about this, Mrs. Romina?" she asked quietly after closing the door behind her. "It might complicate things." I know," I admitted, lowering my voice. "But Daniel asked me, and I cannot refuse him." Layla gave me a look that was both sympathetic and cautious. "Then I will make sure the interview is formal. If she is to join, it must not look like favoritism." When Clara came into the office for her interview, I noticed how different she looked in that setting compared to the way she behaved at family dinners. She wore a tailored suit that emphasized her figure, and she spoke with a confidence that I had not seen before. Her resume was not impressive, but she carried herself as if she already belonged. After a round of questions from the hiring panel, Layla told me discreetly, "She will not be the most competent employee, but she knows how to talk." Against my better judgment, I approved her hiring. I convinced myself that perhaps having her close would allow me to understand her better. I told Daniel that his wife would be joining the company as a project coordinator, his voice filled with relief over the phone. "Thank you, Mom. This means more to us than you know." For a brief time, things were peaceful. Clara arrived early to the office, smiled at everyone she passed, and praised me to my face. She even invited me to lunch once, which I accepted, thinking perhaps I had misjudged her. But something in her questions unsettled me. "So, how long do you plan to keep working here?" she asked lightly, stirring her salad. "Most people your age are already retired." I smiled, choosing not to react. "I enjoy my work. It keeps me alive." She laughed softly. "Of course. It's just, times are changing. Companies need new ideas, younger perspectives." Her words lingered with me long after that lunch. I realized then that her presence in the company was not simply about filling a position. She was watching me, studying me, perhaps even preparing for something I could not yet see. What Clara did not know, and what Daniel still did not know, was that the company was mine. The board followed my decisions because, ultimately, I was the one with the authority. I had kept this secret carefully, not out of pride, but out of fear. If Daniel's wife discovered that I was not merely a high-level employee, but the owner of everything, she would see me not as her mother-in-law, but as an obstacle to be removed. I often thought about telling Daniel the truth. I imagined sitting him down and explaining that his father had entrusted me with everything because he believed I was strong enough to protect it. But each time I pictured his face, I saw Clara's shadow standing behind him, and I kept silent. That silence, I now realize, was my mistake, because by opening the doors of our family's business to her, I had unknowingly invited my own betrayal inside. When Clara first began her work at the company, I thought to myself that maybe, just maybe, my worries had been exaggerated. For the first 2 weeks, she walked into the office each morning with her glossy hair tied back neatly, her nails painted in light shades that matched her carefully chosen outfits, and she seemed to do what she was asked without complaint. But it was also clear that she did not care much about the actual tasks. Her desk was always in perfect order, not because of her discipline, but because there was hardly ever anything on it. She would print out papers and then let them sit in neat piles untouched. She sat in on meetings, but her notes were minimal, sometimes nothing more than doodles in the corner of her pad. When asked to prepare follow-up reports, she relied heavily on others, smiling sweetly and pretending she did not quite understand what was required. People helped her at first. Some men, especially the younger ones in the office, seemed all too eager to explain things to her. I noticed it during the 3rd week. She lingered a little longer at the desk of Amir, one of our most promising analysts. Amir was 34, married with 2 young children, but Clara leaned against his desk, laughing at something he said, twirling her pen in her hand like a girl half her age. Later that afternoon, I walked past the design department and saw her chatting with Ilyas, a new hire barely out of university, her voice soft and playful. Her body turned in a way that made me uncomfortable. It wasn't obvious enough to be called improper, but it was too personal for a professional environment. I told myself I might be imagining things, but the glances she exchanged with certain men confirmed my suspicion. I found myself clenching my jaw more often than I wanted to admit. I did not want this behavior inside the company, especially not from my daughter-in-law, and yet she seemed utterly indifferent to the work itself. When I passed her in the hallway, she smiled brightly, but never mentioned projects, never asked questions about clients, never once expressed ambition to rise within the company. I thought to myself, she will grow bored. This is not for her. Soon she will find another interest, and she will leave quietly. I decided not to tell Daniel anything. What would I say? That his wife was wasting her time at the company? That she was using her position as an excuse to socialize? He would either defend her or think I was being unfair, and I did not want to put him in a position where he had to choose between us. I still believed that silence was the safer path. One Friday afternoon, as I walked past the break room, I overheard Clara's voice. She was speaking to two junior employees, both men, laughing as she told a story about Daniel's clumsy attempt to cook dinner the week before. My son's private life, shared openly for amusement. The young men laughed with her, not out of genuine humor, but because they enjoyed her attention. I stood unseen by the doorway, my chest tightening. She had no respect for boundaries, not in marriage, not in work. And yet Daniel knew none of this. He called me that weekend, his voice cheerful, thanking me again for giving Clara a chance to prove herself. He said she came home tired, that she was adjusting well, and he sounded proud. I couldn't bring myself to correct him. At night, I lay awake sometimes, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was being paranoid. Perhaps I was reading too much into Clara's behavior. Perhaps she was simply young and liked to laugh. But then I would recall the way she leaned a little too close to Amir, the way she laughed a little too loudly at Ilyas's jokes, and the way she always seemed detached from her actual responsibilities. It was not paranoia. It was her nature. Layla noticed too. One morning she came into my office, holding a folder, but lowering her voice carefully. "Mrs. Ramina," she said, "I don't mean to overstep, but your daughter-in-law does not seem serious about her position. She leaves early often. Yesterday, she asked Amir to finish her report. She said she wasn't sure how to format it." I kept my expression calm, though my stomach tightened. "Thank you, Layla," I said. "I will watch the situation myself." But I didn't act. Not yet. I told myself I needed to give Clara time. I convinced myself that maybe, with encouragement, she would settle down and learn. In truth, I hesitated, because Daniel's happiness still mattered to me. If I dismissed his wife too quickly, he would think I never gave her a fair chance. The weeks passed, and Clara's indifference remained. She contributed little, but she smiled much. She hovered near the employees who flattered her, while ignoring those who expected her to deliver real work. I saw the pattern clearly, but I bit my tongue. I thought to myself, she will grow bored soon enough, and this whole problem will fade. What I did not realize then was that her indifference was only a mask, and behind it, she was studying us all more carefully than I could imagine. The first rumors reached my ears quietly, in the way office whispers always travel. They never come directly, never in the form of open complaint, but through the subtle remarks people make when they think you are not listening. I had walked past the break room late one afternoon, the hum of the vending machine filling the silence, when I caught two young women from marketing leaning over their cups of tea. "She's always in the corridor chatting, but I've never seen her finish a report on time," one of them said, her voice lowered but not enough. The other gave a small laugh. "Finish a report? She barely starts them. Amir does half her work. Everyone knows she's just here because of her last name." They stopped when they saw me, straightening immediately, their faces polite, but I had heard enough. Later, Layla confirmed it when she came into my office with her usual stack of files. She set them down carefully and said in a quiet tone, "People are beginning to talk, Mrs. Ramina. They say your daughter-in-law is not here for the work. They say she is only here to be seen." I nodded, though a wave of shame passed through me. Shame not because of Clara's behavior. I had expected it from the beginning, but because I had allowed it, because I had let her presence cast a shadow over the discipline Armin and I had built into this company from its first day. My instincts told me to act, to call her into my office and demand accountability, yet I hesitated again. She was Daniel's wife. If I humiliated her, the wound would bleed into my home life as well. But then, almost as if she sensed the shift in the air, Clara's behavior changed. She began arriving earlier, walking into the office with a seriousness I had not seen before. At first, I thought it was an act, a temporary burst of effort after hearing the whispers herself. But she did not stop. She began to appear in places she had once ignored. At department meetings, sitting quietly at the back and taking notes with her neat handwriting. In the archives, asking questions about old contracts and project histories. Even in my own office, where she would linger after knocking politely on the door. "May I ask you something?" she said one morning, stepping in with a notebook in her hand. "When you approve a client proposal, what is the first thing you look for? Is it the budget, the timeline, or the team behind it?" I raised my eyebrows at her. "Why do you ask?" She smiled, a softer smile than her usual polished expression. "Because I want to learn. I realize I've been unfocused. I want to do better. I want to understand how you make decisions. People respect you, and I want to be worthy of that respect too." Her words disarmed me. For weeks I had grown weary of watching her waste time and lean on others. To hear her admit her flaws and ask for guidance stirred something in me. I found myself explaining things I hadn't spoken about in years. The way Armin and I used to analyze risk, how we would sometimes accept a smaller profit margin if it meant securing long-term stability, how every decision was rooted in protecting not just the numbers, but the people behind them. She listened attentively, nodding, scribbling down notes, as though every word I spoke carried weight. I could not help but feel a warmth in my chest. Perhaps I had misjudged her. Perhaps she had simply needed time to mature into her role. From that day on, she shadowed me closely. She asked about the contracts on my desk, about the upcoming board meeting, about the history of certain clients we had worked with for decades. When I mentioned a negotiation from years ago with a stubborn supplier, her eyes lit with interest, and she asked me to tell her the whole story. She even began to reference Armin in her questions, asking, "What would he have done in this case?" And I felt a pang in my heart, remembering how rarely Daniel spoke of his father anymore. I started to look forward to her visits. It was not just that she asked questions. It was the way she asked them, with genuine curiosity, as if she truly wanted to absorb the lessons I had carried for a lifetime. I had never had a daughter of my own, and though I was wary of the thought, I caught myself imagining that perhaps Clara could fill that space. Perhaps our relationship could change. Yet beneath the delight, small doubts pricked at me. Sometimes, when she repeated my words back to me in meetings, she phrased them as if they were her own insights. She would turn to Amir, or to the others, and say, "What we should really consider is the long-term relationship, not just the margin," echoing the very phrase I had given her the day before. The employees nodded, impressed, and Clara basked in their approval. She always glanced at me afterwards, her eyes shining, as though daring me to contradict her. At first, I told myself it was harmless. Everyone repeats what they learn. Wasn't it a compliment, in a way, that she found my guidance worth sharing? But the unease lingered. Another time, during lunch in the cafeteria, I overheard her speaking to Elias. She leaned across the table, her tone lowered conspiratorially. "I've been spending time with Mrs. Ramina. You know, she's actually quite brilliant. I've learned more in 2 weeks than in my whole career. She's really showing me how things work around here." Her words were flattering, but something about the way she said "showing me how things work" made my stomach twist. It was not said with admiration, but with calculation, as though she were studying me, not just to learn, but to use. I brushed the thought aside. I told myself I was being unkind, letting old suspicions taint new progress. I wanted to believe she had changed. One evening, as I was preparing to leave, she appeared at my office door again. "Do you need help with those files?" she asked, pointing at the thick folders I was sliding into my briefcase. I shook my head. "They are confidential." She hesitated, then stepped closer. "I understand. But if you ever need someone to share the burden, I'm here." I want you to know that her voice was soft, her eyes almost tender. For a moment, I felt touched. At my age, offers of help were rare, and though I still managed well enough, it felt comforting to imagine that someone was ready to stand beside me. I smiled at her, Thank you, Clara. That means something. That night, as I sat at my kitchen table reviewing the contracts, I replayed her words. If you ever need someone to share the burden. Why had she phrased it like that? Was it care, or was it ambition? I could not decide. The following week, she surprised everyone by giving a presentation at the team meeting. She had prepared slides about a new marketing approach, citing data she had pulled from recent client surveys. I recognized immediately that half the content had come from Layla's reports, but Clara delivered it with poise and confidence, her voice steady, her gestures controlled. The younger employees whispered afterwards about how impressive she had been. I applauded with the rest, but my heart was heavy. I could see the effort she was making, yet I could not ignore the way she borrowed from others and polished it into her own performance. Still, I said nothing. I told myself again, she is trying. Isn't that enough? Days turned into weeks, and Clara's attentiveness grew. She brought me coffee sometimes, setting it gently on my desk with a smile. She offered to drive me home on late evenings, insisting that it wasn't safe for me to drive alone after dark. She even began asking questions about the company's foundation, about the early days when Armin and I struggled. Tell me how you started, she urged one afternoon, her eyes wide with what seemed like admiration. I hesitated. Few people knew those stories. How we had lived on almost nothing, how we had risked our home as collateral for our first contract, how many times we nearly lost everything. Sharing it with her felt intimate, almost like handing her a piece of my soul. But she listened so intently, nodding at each detail, that I found myself speaking for over an hour, reliving the past I had kept locked away for so long. When I finished, she sighed. It's incredible. No wonder the company is so strong. You and Mr. Armand built something extraordinary. Her words warmed me, and for a moment, I forgot my doubts. But later, as I walked to my car, I noticed her in the parking lot, speaking on her phone. Her voice carried across the space, sharp and brisk. Nothing like the soft admiration she had shown me earlier. Yes, I know how she makes decisions now, she said into the phone. She always considers stability over short-term gains. That's her weak point. If we frame ideas as long-term security, she'll always approve them. I stopped in my tracks, my hand frozen on my car door handle. Was she talking about me? Was she dissecting my methods to someone else? The next morning, she was cheerful again, greeting me with that same gentle smile, asking if I had slept well, as if the previous evening had never happened. I told myself I must have misheard. Perhaps she was speaking of a client. Perhaps I was projecting my suspicions again. And so I reassured myself, it is just my imagination. Yet deep inside, a voice whispered that imagination had nothing to do with it, that Clara's attentiveness was not affection but strategy, and that I was letting her closer than was safe. It was a Thursday evening, the kind of day that stretches long and heavy, with meetings stacked on top of each other until the hours blur together. By the time the office began to empty, I was exhausted. My desk was still covered with contracts and reports that required my review, but I told myself I would carry them home and work at the kitchen table, as I often did. I slipped the most urgent files into my leather briefcase, locked the rest in the cabinet behind me, and turned off the desk lamp. The corridors were quiet as I walked out, the kind of quiet that makes every step echo. I passed a few employees heading toward the elevators, exchanging polite nods. The building always felt strangely alive at night, its glass walls reflecting back the city lights, its silence almost watchful. I was halfway to the lobby when Layla caught up with me, her voice hurried. Mrs. Ramina, she called gently, don't forget tomorrow's board schedule. I put the documents in your calendar folder. I smiled at her. Thank you, Layla. Go home and rest. You work too much. She gave me a faint smile and disappeared toward the parking garage. By the time I reached my car, I was already thinking about the quiet evening ahead. A pot of tea, the stack of papers, perhaps an early night. I drove home, unaware that the real story of the day had not yet ended. It was nearly 9 o'clock when the phone rang. I was in the living room, surrounded by open folders, my reading glasses perched on my nose. The name on the screen belonged to Layla, one of the younger women from marketing, not to be confused with my assistant Layla. I hesitated before answering. Calls at this hour rarely brought good news. "Hello?" I said. Her voice was cautious. "Mrs. Ramina, I'm so sorry to disturb you at home, but I thought you should know something. Maybe it's nothing, but it seemed unusual I set my pen down." "Go on?" I was leaving the office around 7. I had stayed late to finish a client presentation. As I walked past the executive floor, I saw someone leaving your office. She paused, as though uncertain whether to continue. "I thought it was you at first, but then I remembered seeing you leave earlier with your briefcase. This person wasn't carrying a bag like yours. It was your daughter-in-law." She had some papers in her hand. For a moment, silence stretched between us. My heart thudded in my chest. "Are you certain?" I asked carefully. "Yes," she said firmly. "I recognized her." She looked nervous when she saw me, but she smiled quickly and walked toward the elevator. I didn't think much of it then, but after I got home, I couldn't stop wondering. "I know you don't usually let anyone else handle your office documents." I forced my voice to remain calm. "Thank you, Layla. You were right to tell me. I will look into it. Please don't mention this to anyone else for now." She promised she wouldn't, and after I hung up, I sat very still, staring at the papers spread across my coffee table. My tea had gone cold. Clara. Had she really gone into my office after I left? Had she really walked out with papers in her hand? My mind raced through the possibilities. Perhaps it was harmless, a printed report she had left earlier, some minor notes. But the doubt lodged in my chest like a stone. I thought of her recent attentiveness, the way she had asked to share my burden, the way she leaned close to study the contracts on my desk, the way she listened with such intensity when I explained my methods. I remembered her voice in the parking lot, telling someone over the phone about my weak point. I rose from the sofa abruptly. If she had taken something from my office, I needed to know exactly what. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The security guard greeted me with surprise. "Good morning, Mrs. Ramina. You're here before the sun." "I need to check something," I said, keeping my tone light. I went straight to the security room, a small space tucked behind the lobby where rows of monitors displayed the building's camera feeds. The guard on duty, a middle-aged man named Rafiq, who had worked there for years, looked startled when I entered. "Mrs. Ramina?" he said, standing quickly. "Relax, Rafiq," I told him. "I need your help. I'd like to review the footage from last night, specifically the executive floor, between 7 and 7:30. He hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Of course. Please sit." I leaned over his shoulder as he navigated the files. The footage flickered across the screen, grainy but clear enough. There was my office door, locked after I had left. The corridor remained empty for several minutes. Then, at exactly 7:12, Clara appeared. I felt my breath catch. She looked around cautiously before pulling a keycard from her purse. My keycard. No, it couldn't be. But as she swiped it, the light blinked green and the door opened. She slipped inside. The footage jumped forward 3 minutes. The door opened again and Clara emerged, a stack of papers in her hand. She glanced down the corridor, her movements quick, almost furtive, before walking briskly toward the elevator. I pressed my hand against the desk to steady myself. "Can you print me a copy of this?" I asked, my voice quieter than usual. Rafiq hesitated. Is there a problem?" "Not for you to worry about," I said firmly. "Just keep this between us." No one else should know I was here. He nodded, understanding, and handed me the printed stills a few minutes later. As I walked back to my office, the papers clutched tightly in my hand. My thoughts spiraled. How had she gotten access to my keycard? Had she taken it from my desk at some point, copied it somehow? And what exactly had she carried out of my office? I unlocked my cabinet, and rifled through the folders. Everything seemed to be in order, at least at first glance. The contracts were there, the financial reports untouched, but I could not shake the memory of that stack in her hand. It had been too thick for casual notes. I sat at my desk, staring at the security stills. Clara's face was captured in mid-step, her expression sharp, determined, not the soft, admiring smile she always wore for me. For the first time, I saw her without the mask. I could have called her into my office right then. I could have demanded an explanation, confronted her with the evidence. But something stopped me. Daniel, if I accused her without proof of what she had taken, he would defend her. He would accuse me of paranoia, of inventing stories because I disliked her. And Clara herself would deny everything, perhaps even turn it against me, saying I was too old, too forgetful, too suspicious. I needed certainty before I acted. So I decided to remain silent. For now. I locked the stills in my drawer, slipped the key into my pocket, and forced myself to go about the day as if nothing had happened. When Clara arrived later, her smile was bright as always. "Good morning, Mrs. Ramina," she said warmly, as though the night before she hadn't crept into my office like a thief. I smiled back, my voice steady. "Good morning, Clara." But inside, the doubt had hardened into resolve. She had taken something. I just had to discover what. I have always believed that silence can be sharper than words. There are times when confronting someone directly only gives them the opportunity to weave their lies more tightly. But silence, watching without speaking, waiting without warning, forces people to reveal themselves. It was with that conviction that I decided not to confront Clara about the papers. For 2 days after I saw the security footage, I carried the knowledge inside me like a stone in my pocket, heavy, cold, unspoken. She came into the office each morning with the same cheerful smile, greeting me warmly, offering to bring me coffee, asking gentle questions about upcoming projects. To anyone else, she looked like a devoted junior colleague, eager to learn from her experienced superior. Only I knew that behind her wide eyes and soft voice, she had slipped into my office at night and carried something away in her hands. I told no one, not Daniel, not Layla, not even the security guard who had printed the stills. The evidence stayed locked in my drawer, and my lips stayed closed. If Clara had stolen something important, then she would reveal her purpose soon enough. And if she had taken nothing but scraps, then I would have lost nothing except my trust. Either way, I needed to see what her next move would be. The timing was not coincidental. The quarterly board meeting was approaching, a meeting that always carried weight, where financial reports were reviewed, contracts renewed, and new strategies proposed. For years, I had led those meetings quietly, letting the directors believe they were steering while I held the rudder in my hands. I knew that Clara had been circling closer and closer to the heart of the company, watching me, listening to me, learning my methods. If she was going to make a move, it would be there, in front of the board, where appearances mattered most. The days leading up to the meeting were strangely calm. Clara shadowed me as always, but I noticed something sharper in her questions now. "What kind of objections do the board members usually raise?" she asked one afternoon as we walked through the corridor. "Do they resist change, or are they open to innovation?" I gave her a measured glance. "It depends on how the proposal is framed." "They want stability more than excitement. If you appeal to their sense of security, they will accept even risky ideas." She nodded thoughtfully, as if absorbing a lesson she intended to repeat. The next day, she lingered again, leaning against the edge of my desk as I reviewed a thick contract. "I know this meeting is important," she said lightly, though her tone carried weight. "I hope it goes well. The company depends on your guidance, after all." I smiled faintly, though inside my suspicion deepened. Was that admiration or warning? I continued my work, outwardly calm, but every small gesture of hers felt like a thread being pulled tighter. She watched me sign documents, asked about the order of presentations, even hinted at which board members she thought might resist certain decisions. She had never cared about such details before, On the evening before the meeting, I stayed late in my office, reviewing the final reports. I locked everything away carefully when I finished, double-checking that nothing lay on my desk. As I stood by the window, the city lights glittering below, I caught myself whispering to Armin's memory. Something will happen tomorrow. I can feel it. And I will be ready the next morning. The building hummed with tension. Board meetings always did, but this time the atmosphere felt sharper, like static in the air before a storm. I dressed carefully in a deep navy suit, the one Armin had once said made me look untouchable, and I arrived early to ensure everything was in place. One by one, the directors gathered in the boardroom, a long glass-walled chamber with a polished mahogany table at its center. I greeted each of them with the calm authority they had come to expect, shaking hands, exchanging polite words. Clara entered too, carrying her notebook, her expression bright with purpose. She was not invited as a participant, of course, but she had insisted on assisting with preparations, and I had not denied her. Better to keep her close than to push her away. As the meeting began, I led the opening statements, as I always did. The reports were presented, financials reviewed, contracts renewed. Everything proceeded smoothly, almost too smoothly, and I found myself glancing at Clara more often than at the board. She sat near the back, her pen moving swiftly across the page, her eyes flicking from speaker to speaker. She looked less like an observer and more like a strategist waiting for her turn. Then, just as the discussion turned to a major new contract with an overseas supplier, Clara rose from her chair. "Excuse me," she said politely, her voice carrying just enough to command attention without seeming intrusive. "May I offer a perspective?" The directors looked at her with mild surprise. A junior coordinator speaking in a board meeting? Normally, such a breach of protocol would have been frowned upon. But Clara smiled warmly, confidently, as though she belonged there. Before I could intervene, she continued. "I've had the privilege of spending time with Mrs. Ramina these past weeks, learning how she evaluates opportunities. One thing she has taught me is that stability matters more than short-term profit. With that in mind, I think we should consider the risks in the overseas contract." I felt my jaw tighten. The words were mine, almost verbatim from a conversation I had with her 2 weeks earlier. She repeated them smoothly, weaving them into her own commentary. The directors leaned forward, listening. Clara spoke with poise, pointing out details that were indeed worth considering, details she could only have known if she had read the confidential reports. My reports. She must have taken them that night. I kept my expression neutral, but inside my chest a storm raged. She was not merely borrowing my words now. She was using them to position herself as insightful, as valuable, as someone with the company's best interests at heart. And the board members, men who had known me for decades, were nodding at her as though she were a rising star. When she finished, she lowered her pen and looked at me with an innocent smile, as if seeking my approval. I returned the smile. "Thank you, Clara," I said evenly. "That was thoughtful." The meeting continued, but I heard little of it. My mind was already racing ahead, analyzing, calculating. She had shown her hand. She had taken my knowledge, my documents, my methods, and presented them as her own. And she had done it not recklessly but carefully, choosing her moment, framing it in a way that made her look like a protégé rather than a thief. No one else noticed, or if they did, they dismissed it. But I noticed. As the meeting drew to a close, I gathered my papers slowly, deliberately, while Clara lingered by the door, chatting with one of the younger directors. He smiled at her, clearly impressed. She laughed lightly, touching his arm as she spoke. I slipped the final folder into my briefcase, my decision forming like steel inside me. I would not confront her now, not yet. I would watch, I would wait. And when the moment came, I would show her that the company she thought she could outmaneuver was not built on borrowed words and stolen papers, but on the unyielding determination of those who had created it with their own hands. Tomorrow, or the day after, she would make her next move. And when she did, I would be ready. For now, silence remained my sharpest weapon. I had learned to listen carefully over the years. A company does not survive on numbers alone. It survives on whispers, on the things people say when they think no one important is listening. It was those whispers that often warned me of danger before it reached the boardroom, that told me which employees were loyal and which ones were merely waiting for an opportunity. That was how I heard Clara's true voice. It was late in the afternoon, a week after the board meeting. The corridors were quieter than usual, most employees already gathering their things for the evening. I had left my office briefly to check on some documents in the archive room. As I returned, I heard voices echoing from the far end of the hallway near the conference wing. At first, I thought nothing of it. But then a familiar laugh rang out, sharp and careless. Clara. I slowed my steps, staying near the corner where the hall bent. Her words carried clearly through the empty space. She's too old, she was saying, her voice dripping with confidence. You all see it, don't you? She can't run this place forever. Someone has to take over, and it might as well be me. I already know how she makes her decisions. I've been studying her. Soon enough, I'll be in her chair. A stunned silence followed, broken only when one of the men she was speaking to let out a nervous chuckle. Clara, do you know what you're saying? Of course I do, she replied, almost smug. She's been in power long enough. She thinks she's untouchable because of her history here, but times are changing. The directors like me, the employees respect me, and once I prove I can handle real responsibilities, it will be obvious that I'm the future. Honestly, it's pathetic that she still clings to the position. It's time she steps aside and lets someone younger lead. I stood frozen against the wall, my hand gripping the edge of a file so tightly that the paper crumpled. Her words struck me like blows, not because they surprised me. Deep down, I had known her ambition all along, but because of the brazen way she spoke them aloud, in my building, to my people, without fear. The colleagues she had cornered, two mid-level managers from logistics, did not respond with the admiration she expected. Their voices lowered, uneasy. Clara, one of them said carefully, do you even know who you're talking about? Do you really think Mrs. Romina is just another executive you can replace? There was a pause. Then Clara laughed again, sharper this time. What do you mean? She's a director, yes, but that doesn't make her irreplaceable. The board could easily— You don't understand, the second manager interrupted, his tone firm. She isn't just a director. She owns the company, every share, every right, it belongs to her. This business was founded by her and her husband. Without her, there is no company. The silence that followed was heavier than any I had heard before. I could almost hear Clara's breath catch. That's not possible, she said at last, her voice smaller now, the arrogance stripped away. Daniel never said anything. He doesn't even know. Maybe he doesn't, the first manager said, his tone almost pitying. But it's true. Everyone close to her knows. She kept it quiet, probably to protect her family. But make no mistake, Clara. The seat you think you're going to take? It isn't available. It never was. I stepped back slowly, my heart pounding, my pulse loud in my ears. I had heard enough. By the time I returned to my office, my legs felt heavy, but my resolve had never been clearer. She had revealed herself fully now, not just to me, but to others. She had declared openly her intention to take what was mine, only to be confronted with the truth she had never considered. And that was what struck me most. The shock in her voice, the disbelief. She had built her schemes on the assumption that I was nothing more than an aging figurehead, a relic holding on to a seat of honor. She had never imagined that I was the foundation itself. The next morning, Clara entered my office with her usual bright smile, but it was strained now, forced. She carried her notebook, but her hands trembled slightly as she placed it on the desk. Good morning, Mrs. Romina, she said softly, almost too softly. Good morning, I replied, watching her carefully. She hesitated, then tried to recover her composure. I was thinking, if you need help preparing for the upcoming negotiations, I'd be glad to assist. I've been learning a lot, and I think I could be useful. I looked at her for a long moment, long enough that she shifted uncomfortably under my gaze. Then I smiled faintly. I know you've been learning, I said evenly. I know you've been paying very close attention. Her eyes flickered with something. Fear, perhaps, or realization. I let the silence stretch, savoring the shift in power, before turning back to my papers. That will be all for now, Clara. She left quickly, her footsteps unsteady in the corridor. When the door closed, I allowed myself a deep breath. For weeks I had doubted my instincts, questioned whether my suspicions were only imagination. Now I knew. I had heard her ambition in her own words, had seen her confidence crumble when faced with the truth. And the best part was this. She now realized that I had known everything all along, from the moment she had crept into my office, from the moment she had carried those papers out under the watch of the cameras. I had been watching, waiting. The game she thought she was playing was already lost, but I would not end it yet. No. Ending it now would be too merciful. I would let her stew in her realization, let her stumble under the weight of her own arrogance, let her wonder with every smile of mine whether I was simply humoring her or preparing her downfall. Because in truth, both were correct. The call came late at night. I had just finished setting aside a folder of contracts, my reading glasses sliding down my nose, when my phone began to buzz against the wooden surface of the table. Daniel's name lit up the screen. I hesitated before answering. My son rarely called this late. "Mom!" he said the moment I pressed the phone to my ear, his voice sharp, urgent, almost panicked. "What the hell is going on?" I straightened in my chair. "Good evening, Daniel." "What are you talking about?" He exhaled harshly. "Don't play with me," Clara told me. "No, actually, she screamed at me that people at the company said you own everything. The company, the shares, the board, listens to you because you're the one in control. She said she's been made to look like a fool. Is it true? All this time, is it true?" So she had run to him. Of course she had. Cornered by the truth in the hallway, stripped of her illusions, she must have rushed home to salvage whatever power she thought she still held, using my son as her shield. I closed my eyes for a moment before answering. "Yes, Daniel." "It's true." His silence on the other end stretched long and heavy. Then he burst out, his words a mixture of hurt and anger. "Why wouldn't you tell me? I'm your son. You've been keeping this from me for years. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for me to hear from Clara, of all people?" "I know," I said softly. "And I'm sorry. But I didn't keep it from you to hurt you. I did it to protect you." "Protect me?" he repeated, his tone incredulous. "Yes. You married a woman I did not trust." My voice shook slightly, but I forced myself to continue. "From the very beginning, I saw what she was capable of. I didn't want her to use you, or me, or this company. And I knew if she realized how much power you truly had access to through me, she would try to take advantage of it." Daniel's breathing was ragged. "So you thought lying to me was better than trusting me?" "I could have handled it. Could you?" I asked quietly. "Daniel, be honest with yourself. From the moment you married her, you defended her every choice, every word, even when it hurt me. If I had told you then, would you have believed me if I warned you she might use you?" He didn't answer right away. I could hear him shifting, pacing perhaps, the creak of floorboards under his feet. "I didn't want this for you," I whispered. "I didn't want you to be caught between your wife and your mother, torn apart by loyalties. So I carried the truth myself. Because this company doesn't matter compared to you. Compared to my son, for the first time, his voice broke. "Mom, I don't know what to say." I let the silence rest between us. Then I spoke carefully. "Daniel, there is more. And before you defend her again, I want you to see it with your own eyes." I reached for the small folder I had hidden away in my desk drawer. Inside were the photographs and statements I had collected quietly over the past weeks. Things I hadn't wanted to show him. things that pained me to even acknowledge. But now the time had come. "You've been blind to what she does at work," I said steadily. "But I haven't. I've seen the way she behaves with other men. The flirting, the late nights, the way she uses her position not to learn but to manipulate." "That's not—" Daniel began, his instinct to defend her rising again. "It is," I cut in firmly. "I have evidence, not rumors, not whispers. Proof." I attached the files to a message on my phone, my hands steady despite the ache in my chest. Stills from the security cameras, Clara leaning too close to Amir's desk, her hand brushing his arm. Her late-night meeting in the break room with Elias, laughter too intimate for colleagues. And worst of all, the footage of her leaving my office with stolen papers. Alongside them, I included written statements from employees who had quietly confided in me, people who had seen enough to know what was happening, but were afraid to speak until I asked. "I'm sending it now," I told him. "Look at it before you say another word." There was a pause, then the ping of his phone receiving the files. The silence that followed stretched long, filled only with his breathing as he opened each one. I imagined him standing there in his living room, staring at the screen, the pieces of his carefully guarded life shattering one by one. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. She told me she was staying late to help you. She said she was learning. She swore to me she respected you. Respect," I said bitterly. "She called me old. She said she would take my place. She laughed in the hallways about how easy it would be. Your wife doesn't respect me, Daniel. She doesn't respect you either. She only respects what she can take." I heard a choked sound from him. Anger, grief, disbelief all tangled together. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I hoped I was wrong," I admitted. "I hoped that if I gave her time, if I gave her space, she might change. For your sake, for the sake of your marriage. But she hasn't. She's only grown bolder." The line was quiet again. When he finally spoke, his words were heavy. "What do I do, Mom?" My throat tightened. For all his age, for all his pride, he sounded like the boy he once was. The boy who used to run to me after a nightmare, asking how to make the fear go away. "You do nothing rash," I said gently. "You think first. You remember who you are, not who she tried to make you. And you decide if this marriage is worth the lies, the betrayal, the humiliation." "And you?" he asked quietly. "What will you do?" I looked at the papers still spread across my table, at the photographs, at the years of sacrifice Armin and I had poured into the company. I thought of Clara's smug laugh, her arrogance, her shock when she discovered the truth. "I will protect what is mine," I said firmly, "what your father and I built. And I will protect you, even if it means protecting you from her." Daniel's breath caught, but he didn't argue. I need time." "I know," I said softly. "Take it. But don't let her fill that time with her lies. Look at the proof, Daniel. See her for who she really is." When the call ended, I sat in the silence of my living room, the city lights flickering through the curtains. I felt both exhausted and strangely calm. For the first time in weeks, the burden was no longer mine alone. My son knew the truth. He could no longer hide behind her smile. The battle was far from over, but the veil had been lifted. And in the end, that was the beginning of her downfall. The morning after Daniel's call, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The building was quiet, the polished floors reflecting the first pale light of the day. My briefcase felt heavier than normal, not because of the files inside, but because of the decision I had made overnight. I had waited long enough, allowed Clara to test her limits, to circle closer and closer to the center of what was mine. But the moment had come to draw the line. She would not take another step. When she arrived later, I was already seated at my desk, reviewing papers with calm precision. She entered with her usual bright smile, though I noticed her eyes dart nervously toward me, as if searching for reassurance. "Good morning, Mrs. Ramina," she said softly, almost too sweetly. Do you need me to prepare anything for the afternoon review? I looked up at her, meeting her gaze steadily. Close the door, Clara. The smile faltered, but she obeyed, shutting the door behind her. She stood before me, her hands clasped, her posture a careful blend of deference and expectation. I've been patient with you, I began quietly, my voice carrying more weight than volume. I gave you an opportunity when you had none. I let you into this company, into this office, into my trust. And what did you do with it? Her lips parted as if to protest, but I raised my hand sharply, silencing her. You took advantage, I continued. You flirted with colleagues. You whispered behind my back. You stole from my office, thinking no one would notice. You told others that I was old and that you would take my place. Do you deny it? For the first time since she entered, her mask cracked. Her eyes widened, her face pale. I don't know who told you that, but it's not true. I respect you. Stop, I said firmly. I heard it with my own ears. And others heard it too. Do not insult me further by pretending otherwise. Her hands trembled, but she forced a nervous laugh. You must have misunderstood. I was only joking. People exaggerate. I would never dash. You would, I interrupted, leaning forward. And you did. You underestimated me, Clara. You thought I was just another aging woman holding on to her seat, too blind to see what was happening around her. You thought you could step into my place with a smile and a few borrowed words. But you forgot one thing. This company is mine. Not the board's, not the employees', not yours. Mine. My husband and I built it from nothing, and I alone carry his legacy. She swallowed hard, her face a mixture of shock and desperation. Daniel never said you owned it. He never knew no, I said calmly, because I chose not to tell him. I kept it quiet for his sake, for your sake, so you would not see him as a doorway to power, but you revealed your ambition without even knowing the truth, and now it has caught up with you. Her composure crumbled then. She stepped forward, her voice rising in a desperate plea. Please don't do this. I can change. I can prove myself. I've worked so hard to understand how you run things. Understand? I echoed, my tone sharper now. You memorized my words, Clara. You repeated my strategies as if they were your own. That is not understanding, it is theft. And it ends today. She blinked rapidly, her eyes glistening. Please, think of Daniel. If you dismiss me, it will destroy my marriage. He will blame you. I held her gaze unflinching. Your marriage is not my responsibility. That is between you and my son. I will not let my company pay the price for your deceit. The silence that followed was suffocating. Clara's breath came in short bursts, her chest rising and falling as though she had run a long distance. Finally, her voice cracked. So that's it? You're throwing me out? Yes, I said simply. As of today, you are relieved of your duties here. You will not return to this office, and you will not speak to my employees again. Security will escort you out if necessary. Her mouth fell open, disbelief etched across her face. She stood frozen for several seconds, then let out a bitter laugh. You'll regret this. You think you've won, but you'll regret it. I leaned back in my chair, my expression calm, composed. The only thing I regret is ever believing you could be better than what you've shown yourself to be. For a moment, she looked as though she might argue again, but then she turned sharply, snatching up her purse from the chair near the door. She left without another word, the sound of her heels clicking furiously down the hallway. I sat very still after she was gone, letting the silence settle back into the room. There was no satisfaction in what I had done, only necessity. Clara had tested me, and I had ended it before she could go further. But I also knew Daniel would be hurt. Whatever he thought of her now, whatever he had seen in the evidence I sent him, the dismissal of his wife from the company would feel like another blow. Later that evening, he called. His voice was quiet, weary. Mom, Clara told me you fired her. Yes, I said softly. I did. She's furious. She says you humiliated her. She says she was only trying to help. I closed my eyes, choosing my words carefully. Daniel, I won't interfere in your marriage. That is for you to decide. But when it comes to the company, our company, I will not allow her behavior to continue. She crossed every line, and I gave her more chances than she deserved. He didn't argue. Instead, his sigh came through the line, heavy and broken. I don't know what to do anymore. You don't have to decide tonight, I told him gently. Take time. Think. Look at her actions, not her words. Only you can choose what comes next in your marriage. But understand this. Whatever you decide, I will always be your mother. And I will always protect what your father and I built. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he whispered, Thank you, Mom. When the call ended, I sat alone in the quiet house, the weight of the day pressing against me. I had dismissed Clara from the company, but the battle in Daniel's heart was still to come. I could not fight that for him. I could only wait, as I always had, and hope he would finally see her for who she was. The house was still, but in the silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Peace. Clara was gone from my company. Whatever storms still brewed in my son's marriage, at least this sanctuary, this legacy of mine and Armin's, was safe again. For now.